Welcome back to our second in the series of lectures on V'chitzu Chavos Me'itim, Swords into Plowshares. Last time we spoke about the general development, the Sikha, where the Rebbe Melech Mashiach said that the declaration of the heads of state at the United Nations in Shavat, Tavshin Beis, 1992, was the beginning of Swords into Plowshares. And now we're going to talk about some specific developments in that area. If I were to ask you, what is the most powerful sword ever created, ever devised by mankind? Everyone would probably say, obviously, nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, the most powerful, most destructive sword ever conceived of, ever developed, and has the power and the potential to destroy the whole planet, everybody on the face of the earth. Chas v'shalom, Rahman al-Islam. And just to emphasize that point, it's worthwhile to go back over some of the history of the past 50 years or so and point out that there were times during the so-called Cold War between the United States and Russia when the world was on the verge of such a nuclear destruction. Most people of my generation are very familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. At that point in time, and it was well publicized at the time, the United States and Russia came on the verge of nuclear war, literally. Russia had moved some nuclear missiles into Cuba, which was just 90 miles away from Florida, and the United States looked at this as a threat, which it obviously was, and the threats went back and forth, and both sides were preparing for nuclear war. Now, there's a couple of things that people don't know about how close this came to be a nuclear war. Because in fact, while most of the things going on were on the diplomatic level, and between Khrushchev and President John Kennedy, yet, while the heads of state, the presidents, are the ones that really have the power to order a nuclear attack, or call off a nuclear attack, nevertheless, it's a fact that once nuclear-armed aircraft are in the air, it's up to the discretion of the pilot of the particular plane if he thinks it's appropriate to fire the nuclear missile or not. And it came pretty close. There were some mistakes, near accidents, while this crisis was going on, and just by error and by misunderstanding, it almost came to nuclear war. Just to mention one fact, a radar tracking station in Morristown, New Jersey, picked up, at one point, a missile off the coast of Florida. And from all indications, it looked like this was a missile fired from Cuba on its way to Washington. If that were the case, it would be about 10 minutes till it reached Washington and blew up Washington. So immediately, the president was consulted and went back and forth what they should do. And there was the head of the Strategic Air Command at that time, General Curtis LeMay, had been pressuring Kennedy all along to attack Russia right off the bat with nuclear weapons, not to wait, not to take any chances. But fortunately, before any reaction could take place, it was confirmed that this was an American missile, had nothing to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was just a regular routine test of an American missile being shot from that base in Florida, and it was shot to go into the Atlantic Ocean. Totally harmless. But such a thing could almost brought the world to nuclear war a couple of times. 20 years later, the same thing almost happened again, except very quietly. And nobody knew what was going on, not even the Americans. This was there was like a war game that the United States played to like test and practice for a nuclear war with no intention of launching any missiles. It was called Able Archer. This was in 1983, and it was just a practice, a trial run, but they went through all the steps to prepare for a nuclear war, to order the nuclear war, to get the missiles ready, to get everyone in position, and the Russians were watching this. Now the Russians knew that America does these war games, and that was nothing new, but somehow they got it into their head that this time they were doing it as a cover, that they really intended to attack, a nuclear attack against Russia, and the war game was just a cover to pretend it was just a game, but in the end they were going to attack. So they got themselves ready. And they, for a serious nuclear war, ordered all their missiles in place, had their nuclear aircraft up in the air, nuclear submarines, everything was ready to strike back. And their situation rooms, they were up all night, ready to press the buttons, and just waiting for the first American missile to hit. Now, America saw all this happening from the Russian side too, but they didn't take it seriously because they thought the Russians were, kind of playing the game back, like, the shadow boxing. No, the Russians were serious. They were ready to strike back, but they waited. They did not strike until America would send the first missile. Of course, America never did send the first missile because it was just a game. And the whole thing just quietly fizzled out. In the United States, this was President Reagan's time, nobody knew about this. The American intelligence didn't know that Russia was seriously intending a nuclear strike back. And the scare, the fright after the fact, when it was seen that this was really the verge of a nuclear war, made both sides get a little more serious about nuclear disarmament. So that was the Cold War. Now, going ahead 10 years to 1992, when this declaration of swords into plowshares, did take place, everything was phased out. As we mentioned last time, the ISTC, International Science and Technology Center, was set up in Moscow to employ the now unemployed nuclear scientists who were working for the Russian military, and they were given projects to use nuclear science, nuclear technology for peaceful uses. What I'm going to tell you tonight is about a story of this development of nuclear technology being made peaceful that happened right here in New York, and I personally had the zchus to be involved in it. The story started like this. It all started with a prominent Lubavitcher Chassid, Mashpia, named Rabbi Yitzchak Springer, Olav Shalom. Rabbi Springer, with the approval of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, used to put full-page ads in the New York Times, publicizing all the inyanim of the Gula, all the inyanim of that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is Melech HaMashiach, and how people should start improving their lives and upgrading their lives in the observance of Torah and mitzvos if they're Jewish, the observance of the 7 Noachite laws that apply to all mankind if they're not Jewish, and to contact him for either information, for advice, for reports that he would give into the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach of people increasing their observance of mitzvos and so on. And one of the things he discussed there in one of his ads was that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach's announcement that the era of swords into plowshares had already begun, as we spoke about last week. So he got a call from a lawyer in Manhattan named Joel Gray. And Mr. Gray tells him that he is the president of a corporation which is developing a nuclear reactor which is non-proliferative. Says, the story is, one day a man walks into his office. This man was a prominent nuclear scientist named Professor Alvin Redkowski, Olav Shalom. Alvin Redkowski was the chief scientist of Admiral Rickover And Radkowski was the one who was responsible for developing the nuclear weapons for the American Navy, nuclear submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers, and so on. He was an Orthodox Jew, and he wore a yarmulke as he worked. A well-known personality. Anyway, so one day this man, Alvin Radkowski, walks into Mr. Gray's office and tells him that he has designed a new nuclear reactor. A new design for the core of a nuclear reactor, to be more specific, which has a different fuel cycle so that the byproducts of the reaction cannot be used to make bombs. Now, as you know, all the non-proliferation treaties that have gone on for past half century and more all deal with the fact that those countries that have nuclear weapons should keep them under control and not proliferate them, not ship them out or sell them or provide them to third world countries, to military dictatorships, and places like that where they will develop nuclear weapons. Nuclear energy is something that people should have. Provides cheap electricity to places where there may be no other source of electricity, or other sources of electricity may be very expensive. But the problem is the standard nuclear fuel cycle, which uses uranium, produces plutonium as a byproduct. And plutonium is the fuel of nuclear weapons. Radkowski had developed a new nuclear fuel cycle using thorium as the main fuel, and no plutonium is produced as a byproduct, so these nuclear reactors cannot be used to produce nuclear weapons. So he came to Mr. Gray's office and said he wants Mr. Gray to set up a corporation where this nuclear reactor is going to be developed and produced and could be provided to any country in the world without any fear of it being used as a nuclear weapon. So Mr. Gray tells Rabbi Springer, this is what you were talking about in your article, in your ad, of swords into plowshares. We've taken the nuclear sword, the most destructive weapon on the face of the earth, and transformed it into something that can be used for peaceful purposes without any fear of it being used as a nuclear weapon. Rabbi Springer knew of, he was not an expert on, scientific issues, but he knew of our work in the Rabbi Yisrael Arley Research Institute on Mashiach and the Sciences, and he contacted me and he said he wants me to meet Mr. Gray and see what's going on here. And in short, a very close friendship developed very quickly between Rabbi Springer, myself, and Mr. Gray. And we were close friends. Mr. Gray and I are still close friends to this very day. Rabbi Springer, Olav Shalom, passed away a few years ago, but throughout the rest of his life, the three of us were very close. I tried to get Professor Radkowski himself to speak at our next Mashiach and Science conference. This was in 1994. I interviewed Radkowski earlier in the year before our conference because he couldn't come. He was in Eretz Yisrael at the time. He had already, when he retired from the Navy, he moved to Eretz Yisrael, and it was there that he developed his nuclear reactor. I found out the rest of the story from a friend of his, Dr. Naftali Berg, Olav Shalom, prominent Lubavitcher Chassid, who was director of the Advanced Technology Office of the Army Research Laboratory at the Pentagon, where advanced technological weapons were developed. Yeah, that's a story in itself, how Lubavitcher Chassid ended up being director of the top military laboratory at the Pentagon. Maybe we'll go into that next week. But Dr. Berg told me that he was a personal friend of Radkowski, and that, in fact, before Radkowski went to Eretz Yisrael after his retirement, Dr. Berg urged him to have Yechidus with the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach. And this Yechidus took place. Radkowski had a private audience, Yechidus, with the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach for 45 minutes. when I heard this, I was very jealous, because at the time of my chasana, my wife and I were zochet to have yichidus at Rebbe Melech Mashiach, but it was between 5 and 10 minutes. And Redkowski here was in for 45 minutes. And Redkowski himself told me about this, and he told me that among the things that the Rebbe Melech Mashiach told him was that he should continue to write his articles on Torah and science. He had written articles, and he did continue to write articles on Torah and science, particularly attacking evolution, which is contrary to Torah. And he explained in detail in some of his articles exactly what's wrong with evolution as a scientific theory. In other words, it's not a valid scientific theory. It's not valid scientifically, and it's wrong. So, like I said, I wanted to get Redkowski at the conference. He could not make the conference, so I did interview him in Shavat of 1994. This is January 1994. And after that interview, I brought the video of the interview into the Mazkirus, to the secretariat of the Rebbe Melech Mashiach, and I gave it to Rabbi Klein. And I asked him to give it to the Rebbe Melech Mashiach, as here we have a major scientist talking about v'chitzu chavosim le'itim, swords into plowshares, and I wanted the Rebbe Melech Mashiach to have a copy of it. So I came back a few days later to ask Rabbi Klein if there was a reaction, a response, a bracha from the Rebbe Melech Mashiach on it, and he told me that he showed it. He put it on the video for the Rebbe Melech Mashiach to watch it. So the Rebbe Melech Mashiach actually watched the video of that interview. Now that blew me away. That was like seventh heaven. Anyway, to be continued. We'll talk more about this in the next session. But here it is in fact an example. The corporation has been set up. It was initially called the Redkowski Thorium Power Corporation. It developed this nuclear reactor. It has expanded and developed, and now it is called the Lightbridge Corporation. And Mr. Gray's son is now the president of it. And check it out on the internet. Until next time, be well. We hope to see you next time in Yerushalayim HaKodesh with Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach revealed and the Gula complete. That's what happened tonight. Takef miad mamash. Yechi Adonenu Merina Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam Voed. Yechi Adonenu Merina Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam Voed. Yechi Adonenu Merina Rabbeinu Melech Mashiach Le'olam Voed.